European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde says that her institution could launch a digital version of its currency within the next 4 years if they are given the green light this summer. Joining me to talk about the implications today on Stansberry Investor is Willem Middelkoop. He is the author of The Big Reset, and he joins me today from Switzerland. Willem, welcome back to Stansberry Investor. Good to see you.
Great to see you again, Daniela.
Yes, and congratulations on the success of our last interview. Before we start, can we just share, I know it got to many people, over 700,000 views, and it even reached Tony Robbins.
I signed a contract, so I can't say too much about it. But I did a presentation for his show. Yeah,
that's fantastic. Well, congratulations on that. Happy to know that it's reaching so many people. Now, let's talk business today. I always love bringing you on because you always have us look at things from a different perspective. Christine Lagarde coming out saying that we could see a digital version of the euro within the middle of this decade if they're given the green light this summer. They did, however, seek out the public's thoughts on this, and we're going to talk about the responses they received. But first, are you surprised about the rush that the ECB seems to be in to roll out a digital currency here, Willem?
No, I'm not. I think there are a few reasons why all central banks seem to act on a digital currency at the same time now. And one of the reasons is, of course, the success of Bitcoin and crypto, which started, well, a good 10 years ago. And then the Bank of China really enjoyed the idea of a digital currency in which you can control 100% of all things related to money. And because they're now testing this digital currency, so they're a few years ahead of the Western central bankers. And because of these reasons, the success of the digital currency in China and the success of Bitcoin, the Western central bankers understand they need to speed up their programs now, and they spin it in a way that they're still not sure whether they will introduce it. They're not in a very big rush, but I know from some people I spoke from behind the scenes working on these projects, they really want to finish their digital currency project very, very soon. And they think it's essential for central banks to have a digital currency to be prepared for the next big financial crisis.
Interesting. Okay, now I want to elaborate a little bit more on that. But first, as I mentioned, they submitted the thoughts or idea of a digital currency to the public in a public consultation. They received over 8,200 respondents, the majority from Germany. And the feedback was the number one concern of Europeans is privacy, and rightfully so, right? When we think digital currency, we think, well, they're going to know everything I do now.
Yeah, that's why they're talking about maybe a two-layered system in which you can do small payments and that will be anonymous. The central bankers will promise us all your payments up to, let's say, 20 or 50 euros will be anonymous. And if you make larger payments, this will all be recorded and stored. But of course, there are a few concerns. This is one of the concerns. Another concern is that we might end up with a digital wallet in which we have a direct access to central bank money at the ECB, but also at the Federal Reserve, because the US is working on a similar program. And once you do that, you don't need commercial banks anymore. So this is a very big risk for the commercial bank, because you might know only 3% of all money created is created by the central bank, is printed by a central bank, but 97% is created because of all the new loans and mortgages being created by commercial banks. So if you have this direct route from persons and companies direct with the central bank, you don't need commercial banks anymore. So that's a very big risk. So I think they feel a bit cornered now, the Western central banks, because they feel the need to act because of Bitcoin, because of China. But rolling out a real digital euro or digital dollar brings many problems in different fields.
And it can also push more people towards Bitcoin, which is the interesting part of it, because Lagarde, on the flip side, was, waving a red flag on Bitcoin, a few months ago, saying this needs to be regulated. It's used for illicit activities. Yet at the same time, they want to roll out a digital currency. But if countries and central banks are going to be rolling out these, digital forms of their money, wouldn't it cause more people to perhaps flock to Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's a great point, because they present the digital currencies as some kind of competition to the cryptocurrencies they can't control. But what happens when they start to introduce a digital euro or digital dollar? It will be another layer of fiat money on top of an already a mountain of debt, and we'll build another layer on top of that. So the more central bank digital currencies we create, the more smart money investors will start to flee out of all things government can print towards all government can't print. And of course, people like me have been warning for years that we one day will reach a point that people will start to flee the paper money system and paper assets. But now we don't have to warn for that anymore. It's happening as we speak. And that's the biggest risk of all.
The risk for whom, Willem?
Actually, the risk for everybody. I've been a student of monetary history. I wrote the Big Reset, and in the Big Reset, I have this appendix. It's a list of all demonetized currencies in the last few hundred years. And this list goes on for tens and tens of pages, all currencies that no longer exist. And most of those currencies, they stop working because of hyperinflation. And I'm not going to warn the viewers that we'll have hyperinflation within 1 or 2 years. But when you debase currencies in a way we've done in the last 10 to 12 years, there's a real risk that too many rich people, rich investors, and also savers will start to take their money out of the banking system. If we look at the prices for commodities, steel is up over 150% in the last 12 months. Lumber is up over 130%. Even corn and soybeans are up 60, 70%. If we look at stock markets, and real estate is really picking up, and that's not only something we see in the US, we see that in Europe as well. And in our business, I'm a fund manager. I speak to many rich people. They really start to worry now. They have negative interest rates on their saving accounts, and actually, I think this is scary.
So should we be completely out of the banking system, Willem?
Well, it's of course very dangerous when we would discuss that people get out of a banking system, but let's concentrate on what the market is telling us. And the market is telling us that more and more people get the picture. They understand the debasement of currencies. Look at what happens with the younger generation. Look at what happens with the millennials. You know, they have all these memes on money printing and central bankers, so they get it. And they're not rich, you know, they don't have savings, but they understand some crazy things are happening.
But they also have probably a greater distrust of the system, perhaps.
I think that the younger generation has a better understanding because they didn't study economics and because they didn't have the past of the last 40 or 50 years. So they feel something is very wrong. They see they can't buy an apartment anymore because price went up too much. they see inflation is much larger than officially reported. So I think the new generation, the younger generation, they get it often better than the older generation.
Willem, I want to go back. You made a few good points here, and I was taking many notes. When you were talking about how the rollout of digital currencies could pose a serious threat to the existence of commercial banks, what does that tell us about the relationship then between the central banks and these commercial banks? Don't they want the commercial banks on their side? Do they care?
Of course, and in the last 300 years, we built this system in the West in which central banks and commercial banks were joining forces, and we built a wonderful system that way, in which we created a lot of wealth. But the system has become so unstable now, and this became quite clear after the collapse of Lehman, that you have to reconsider if there's not a need now to reset this whole financial system. And I think some remarks being made in the last 12 months by the World Economic Forum, we need this great reset. And Klaus Schwab telling us that we need to change all the systems we built after the Second World War. The IMF, which came out even with a video, go to their website. There's a video about the new Bretton Woods moment. Well, what was Bretton Woods? That was a conference in 1944 building a new worldwide financial system. We had Janet Yellen during the spring week of the IMF telling the world that we need to build a new global economy in the next few months from the ground up, and in a new restructured world order. And we had Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, and he already said in 2017 we need a monetary reset to stop runaway climate change. So many signs coming together. And as I've been studying this topic for last 10 years, I published the Big Reset in 2014. It's quite clear to me that big changes are coming, but it's very, very difficult to predict when it will happen and how it will happen. But the central bank digital currencies will be part of a larger monetary reset. That's for sure.
So if we look at Bahamas, which was the first central bank to roll out a digital currency, the sand dollar, they say the impetus for that was Hurricane Dorian, which plummeted the banks. People weren't able to get cash, so they were planning ahead for a next potential disaster. So when you say that the central banks like the ECB are in a hurry because they're planning for a financial disaster, not speaking about a hurricane necessarily, but what does that look like for you? What are they preparing for?
Well, I visited the website of the European Central Bank this morning to prepare for this talk. And while Christine Lagarde is stating that we still haven't made a decision yet, if you read everything related on a digital euro on our website, they clearly state that we need a new form of money to be able to handle the next financial crisis. And nobody knows what the next financial crisis will be. And in the summer of 2019, Mark Carney said during his speech at Jackson Hole that we need to find a successor for the dollar, and that could well be a new digital world currency. And if we see his remarks now, with the knowledge we have now, 2 years later, it's quite clear that they would love to use the IMF to make this basket of digital currencies. Even China can join that. So maybe in 5 years' time, we'll have this new world currency, let's call it the Bancor, and there will be a basket of all main digital currencies worldwide. So the Chinese yuan will be in it, the new euro can be in it, the US dollar, the digital form will be in it. But this is all, we're not sure yet, but all indications point towards this direction.
It's very interesting. It seems that when you piece it all together, you really start to see the bigger picture. It's fascinating. So let's tie it in to Jerome Powell and the Fed here in the US saying, we're actually in no rush to roll out a digital currency. We don't necessarily want to be the first here. We want to get it right. So
yeah, that's the spin. That's of course the spin. We're not in a rush. We want to do it right because they have the same problem like the ECB with all the commercial banks who don't like this. But if you look at the US, I think it was in 2020, we had this new banking act. It's a law. And the new banking act, you can Google it and find it online. It talks about digital wallets, digital dollars. So behind the scenes, it's the same as in Europe. Central bankers working very hard to create this digital dollar, like the digital euro. And one day they will say, we're ready now, and we can start, promoting it to the general public. And maybe one day we'll get a message that we can download the digital wallet from the Google App Store. But of course, a lot of work has to be done. China has proven that it can be done. China is a few years ahead. But as said, I expect all Western central bank to be able to roll out these new digital currencies within 3 to 5 years, and maybe even sooner.
Interesting. Well, at the end of the day, the Fed has to protect the US dollar. They don't want a threat to the world's reserve currency, Willem.
No, but the threat is there. The threat is real. If we look at the deficit, the current deficit for this year in the US will be over 3 trillion. Yeah. That's 17% of GDP. We only had 1 year in which the deficit was larger. That was 1943. That was the Second World War. We see that 25% of US national debt was created in the last 12 months. We see that the Federal Reserve has to buy 3/4 of all US new debt being created. So there are not enough international investors anymore willing to support the US dollar. So I think this explains why the Federal Reserve understands that they need to bring the international monetary system with the dollar as anchor towards a new phase, and we need a new anchor. And that's why Mark Carney gave this speech in 2019. Reread his speech, which he presented at the Jackson Hole conference, because he clearly states it.
Fascinating. I guess finally, to just wrap on this topic, Willem, protecting oneself in this, and I know off air and in multiple conversations, we've talked about the importance of owning things outside of, paper dollars here, hard assets. How necessary is it today?
I think it's essential. And I think this started after the Lehman crisis, that people who were really studying the world of finance and the insiders started to understand that you need to hedge your risk within the current financial system by buying some gold and silver. Actually, I stopped working as a journalist in 2008 in the Netherlands to start 2 companies who would provide services for people who were in need of these products. And I started 1 Billion Shop, because the Dutch national banks, the commercial banks, they stopped selling gold and silver to the general public in the 1990s. I sold that business in 2011. And I started a fund in which it was easy for people to invest in companies who were finding these commodities worldwide, because these commodities would become scarcer and scarcer. And after Lehman, I think there were only 2 or 3% of people getting a bit alarmed and were starting to flee towards all these hard assets. But now, after the Corona crisis and the economic crisis, which followed on the health crisis, I think it's a much larger group now. And if I look at the inflow into our fund, we were a $50 million fund 12 months ago. Now we are a 150 million fund. And we don't have to advertise. You know, people are calling us because they see they need to hedge themselves and take positions into, well, like I said, all government can't print.
Fascinating insights, Willem. I appreciate your deep dive into this. I knew you would deliver some real goods for us today. We're going to be talking about Silver Squeeze next with Willem, so be sure to stay tuned. In the meantime, remember to share us where you watch us. That's it for me. I'm Daniela Cambone.